Life has a way of revealing our true character in the most unexpected moments. Before you continue watching, make sure to comment where you're watching from today. This story will show you why we should never judge a book by its cover, especially in a busy New York deli on a cold winter morning. The line at Katz's Delicatessen stretched almost to the door, filled with the usual mix of tourists and locals seeking refuge from the biting December wind. The warmth inside created a foggy film on the windows, and the air was thick with the aroma of fresh-baked rye bread and smoking pastrami. Among the chattering crowd, a man in tattered clothes stood quietly, counting loose change in his weathered hands. His name was James, though few bothered to ask anymore. The years hadn't been kind to him. His face was lined with the stories of countless nights spent under bridge underpasses and in shelter doorways. Yet there was a dignity in how he held himself, even as others in line subtly shifted away, creating an invisible barrier between themselves and what they saw as just another homeless person. The lunch rush was in full swing, and the deli counter was a symphony of controlled chaos. Servers called out orders, while skilled hands sliced meat so thin you could see through it. The prices on the menu board might have given some pause, but this was New York, and Katz's was an institution. James had been saving up for weeks, collecting discarded cans and bottles, doing odd jobs when his arthritic hands would allow. Today was special. It was his birthday, and he had promised himself one proper meal. Behind him, a group of young finance types in expensive suits had been growing increasingly vocal, their laughter carrying an edge of cruelty. They were the kind who treated Manhattan like their personal playground, measuring worth in brand names and bank accounts. The ringleader, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than James would see in a year, made no attempt to hide his disdain. "Hey, buddy," the suit called out, his voice dripping with mock concern. "I think the soup kitchen's a few blocks down." His companions snickered, emboldened by their leader's lack of humanity. James kept his eyes forward, dignity intact though. His shoulders tensed slightly under his thin jacket. The harassment continued as the line inched forward. "You know, some of us actually work for our lunch," another chimed in. This isn't a charity case kind of establishment. Each comment was like a paper cut, small but stinging, designed to make James feel less than human. Near the front of the line, a tall figure in a grey hoodie shifted slightly, his broad shoulders suggesting strength despite the casual attire. He had been observing the scene quietly, his face shadowed by the hood. Something about his presence seemed to command attention, even though he appeared to be trying to blend in. When James finally reached the counter, he carefully placed his collection of coins on the worn surface. "One pastrami on rye, please," he said softly, his voice carrying years of hardship but maintaining its gentleness. The server, a young woman with kind eyes, began counting the coins without judgment. The suit wasn't done. "Oh, great. Now we get to watch him count pennies all day. Some of us have meetings to get back to." His friends laughed on cue, like a well-rehearsed chorus of cruelty. What happened next would become the stuff of local legend. The hooded figure stepped forward, his movement deliberate and purposeful. "I'll cover his meal," he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable Austrian accent, "and add whatever else he'd like." The suit, irritated at someone challenging his moment of power, turned with a sneer. "Look, another bleeding heart, why don't you just—" His words died in his throat as the figure turned and slowly lowered his hood. There stood Arnold Schwarzenegger, his presence filling the deli with an almost electric energy. The once noisy establishment fell into a stunned silence. Here was a man who had risen from humble beginnings to become a champion bodybuilder, a Hollywood icon, and a governor, standing in defense of someone society had forgotten. "You know," Arnold said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and warmth that had captivated audiences for decades, "I came to America with nothing but dreams and determination. This country gave me opportunities, but it wasn't the fancy suits or expensive restaurants that made me successful. He placed a hand on James's shoulder. It was people who showed kindness when they didn't have to, people who looked past appearances to see potential. The suit and his friends had lost all their previous bravado. They stood frozen, faces flushed with embarrassment as their earlier comments hung heavily in the air. Other customers had pulled out their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Arnold turned to the server. "Give this gentleman whatever he'd like, and add a week's worth of meal vouchers." Then he addressed the whole deli. "In fact, lunch is on me today, everyone's lunch." The announcement was met with scattered applause that quickly grew into a heartfelt ovation. James stood there, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. His eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. "Thank you," he managed to say. "But you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Arnold replied with a warm smile. "I want to, because sometimes we all need someone to spot us, just like in the gym. The weight might seem too heavy, but with the right support, we can lift anything." The suit and his friends tried to slink away, but Arnold's voice stopped them. "Hey, wait a minute. Why don't you join us?" The invitation wasn't really a question. "I think we could all learn something from James here. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones in expensive suits. They're the ones who maintain their dignity when others try to strip it away." What followed was perhaps the most unusual lunch gathering Katz's had ever hosted. Arnold insisted that James sit with them, and over pastrami sandwiches and pickles, stories began to flow. James shared his journey. He'd been a construction worker until an accident, and mounting medical bills had cost him everything. He spoke without bitterness, even when describing how invisible he'd become to most people. Arnold listened intently, occasionally sharing his own stories of struggling when he first arrived in America. The suit and his friends, now thoroughly humbled, found themselves gaining a new perspective. The man they had mocked minutes ago was revealed to be a former veteran who had saved lives in his younger days. The story spread through social media like wildfire. Customers shared videos of the encounter, but more importantly, they shared its message. The incident sparked a local movement, with people starting to look differently at those they had previously ignored. The deli became a symbol of transformation, not just of bodies through nourishment, but of hearts through understanding. In the days that followed, James found himself the recipient of job offers, housing assistance, and medical care. Arnold had quietly arranged for him to receive the support. He needed to get back on his feet, but he made sure James maintained his agency in the process. It wasn't about handouts. It was about restoration of dignity. The suit and his friends underwent their own transformation. Witnessing such a powerful display of humanity from someone they admired forced them to confront their own prejudices. They started a program at their firm to hire people struggling with homelessness, recognizing that circumstances, not character, often determined one's situation. But perhaps the most powerful moment came weeks later, when James returned to Katz's. Not as a customer struggling to afford a meal, but as an employee. The deli had offered him a position, and he had accepted with pride. Now he served others with the same dignity he had maintained through his hardest times. Arnold's act of kindness had created ripples that continued to spread, touching lives far beyond that winter morning. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful flex isn't of muscles, but of compassion. That true strength isn't measured by how much we can lift, but by how many we can lift up. And if you're wondering what happened to the suit and his friends, they became regular customers at Katz's, always making a point to chat with James. Their expensive suits remained, but the arrogance they once wore with them had been replaced by something far more valuable: humility and understanding. This story isn't just about a celebrity standing up for someone in need. It's about the potential for transformation that exists in every moment of choice. It's about recognizing that the person we mock today could be the one who teaches us our most valuable lesson tomorrow. So remember, when you look at someone, really look at them. See beyond the surface, beyond the circumstances, to the human being underneath, because you never know. The person you're judging might have an unexpected advocate in their corner, ready to remind the world that everyone deserves respect, dignity, and a chance to share their story. What happened at Katz's Delicatessen that winter morning was just the beginning of a story that would touch countless lives across New York City. As the video of Arnold's intervention spread across social media, it sparked a conversation about compassion and second chances that would reach far beyond the confines of that historic deli. The morning after the incident, James arrived at Katz's for his first day of work, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he tied on his new apron. The same customers who had once shifted away from him in line now greeted him with warm smiles and genuine interest in his story. The transformation was subtle but profound, like watching winter thaw into spring, 1 degree at a time. Arnold, true to his word, hadn't simply offered a momentary gesture of kindness. He had set in motion a comprehensive plan to help James rebuild his life. Through his extensive network, he had arranged for James to receive proper medical attention for his arthritic hands, a condition that had plagued him since his construction days. The doctor, a specialist in occupational injuries, was moved to tears when James described how he'd continued working even as his hands grew increasingly painful, until the day he physically couldn't lift his tools anymore. But it wasn't just James who was experiencing a transformation. The deli itself had become a symbol of hope and redemption. Regular customers began paying forward meals for those who couldn't afford them, creating a chain of kindness that seemed to grow stronger. With each passing day, the wall behind the counter, once adorned only with celebrity photos, now featured a board where people could pin job opportunities, housing leads, and messages of encouragement. The young finance professionals who had mocked James that day underwent perhaps the most surprising transformation of all. Led by their once arrogant ringleader, they had taken Arnold's words to heart in a way no one expected. They returned to their firm with a mission that went beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. Using their influence and connections, they established a foundation specifically dedicated to helping skilled workers who had fallen on hard times due to medical issues or workplace injuries. Word of their initiative spread through the financial district, and soon other firms began to take notice. The same competitive spirit that once drove them to belittle others was now channeled into seeing who could make the biggest positive impact in their community. The suit, who had led the mockery of James, now spent his lunch breaks at Katz's, not to flaunt his status, but to mentor others who were working to rebuild their lives. Arnold's involvement didn't end with that single intervention either. He began making regular, unannounced visits to the deli, always in his simple gray hoodie, taking time to sit with customers and hear their stories. His presence had a way of dissolving the artificial barriers that often separate people in a city. As diverse as New York, CEOs found themselves sharing tables with construction workers, while students and retirees swapped life stories over steaming plates of pastrami. One particularly memorable afternoon, a young woman entered the deli, clutching a handful of change, just as James had done weeks before. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her eyes held the same mixture of hunger and hesitation that James recognized all too well. Before anyone else could react, James stepped from behind the counter, walked to her side, and quietly covered her meal with his first paycheck. The circle of kindness had come full circle. The media caught wind of these ongoing developments, but what they found wasn't just a heartwarming story of celebrity philanthropy. Instead, they discovered a growing movement of everyday people choosing to see and acknowledge the humanity in others. Local business owners began reaching out to Katz's, asking how they could implement similar initiatives in their own establishments. James's story became a catalyst for change in unexpected ways. His experience as both a recipient and provider of kindness gave him a unique perspective that resonated with people from all walks of life. City council members began inviting him to speak at community meetings, where his quiet dignity and straightforward manner cut through political rhetoric to the heart of issues affecting the working poor and homeless populations. The Deli's atmosphere had shifted subtly but significantly. The usual tourists still came for the famous pastrami and the chance to recreate scenes from When Harry Met Sally, but they found something more meaningful than just a photo opportunity. They witnessed a living testament to the power of community and second chances. Arnold's influence extended beyond just financial support or public advocacy. He began organizing weekly fitness sessions in a nearby park, open to anyone who wanted to participate. The sight of the former Mr. Olympia leading workout sessions alongside people of all ages, sizes, and backgrounds became a regular feature of neighborhood life. He emphasized that building physical strength was interconnected with building personal dignity and community bonds. The transformation of the young finance professionals continued to surprise everyone. They used their analytical skills to create a sustainable model for corporate social responsibility that other companies could replicate. Their foundation's first major initiative was a program that provided interest-free loans to workers needing medical procedures, preventing others from falling into the same spiral that had claimed James's former life. Local schools began bringing students to Katz's, not just for the famous sandwiches, but for lessons in compassion and community building. James would share his story with these young visitors, emphasizing how a single act of kindness or cruelty could set in motion a chain of events that affected countless lives. The students were particularly moved by his lack of bitterness toward those who had mocked him, and how he had chosen to transform his experience into an opportunity to help others. The Deli's weekly revenue actually increased as it became known as more than just a tourist destination. People came not just for the food, but for the atmosphere of genuine human connection. The tip jar at the counter, now labeled Community Support Fund, regularly overflowed with contributions from customers eager to be part of the ongoing story of transformation. James's health improved steadily under proper medical care. His arthritic hands, while not fully healed, became strong enough for him to manage most tasks at work. More importantly, the psychological weight of isolation and invisibility had lifted from his shoulders. He stood straighter, smiled more readily, and had become a mentor to others struggling to rebuild their lives. The suit who had once mocked James made a point of bringing new hires from his firm to the Deli, not just for lunch, but for what he called perspective training. He would recount his own role in the story, not minimizing his past behavior, but using it as an example of how privilege could blind people to their own humanity and that of others. Arnold's regular visits continued. Though he never announced them in advance, he would simply appear, often helping behind the counter or sitting with customers who seemed to be having a difficult day. His presence remained a reminder that true strength wasn't about intimidation or status, but about the power to lift others up when they needed it most. The story's impact rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Other cities began studying the Katz's model of community transformation, looking for ways to replicate its success. Business schools added the case study to their ethics curricula, examining how a moment of conflict transformed into an ongoing movement of positive change. As weeks turned into months, the Deli became a place where barriers continued to dissolve. Executives shared tables with day laborers, tourists broke bread with locals, and everyone was reminded that beneath the surface, differences of wealth, status, or circumstance, there existed a common humanity worthy of dignity and respect. James's birthday now marked not just his personal celebration, but the anniversary of a movement that had started with one man's dignity in the face of mockery, another man's willingness to stand up for what was right, and a community's choice to transform a moment of conflict into an ongoing legacy of compassion and change. The young finance professionals who had once represented the worst of Wall Street's arrogance had become some of the most dedicated advocates for corporate social responsibility. Their foundation's work had expanded beyond New York, creating a model for how the financial sector could use its resources and influence to address social issues in meaningful ways. And so, what began as a confrontation in a deli line had evolved into a sustained movement of positive change, proving that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with a simple choice to see the humanity in others, regardless of their circumstances. The true measure of a movement's impact often reveals itself in the quiet moments between viral headlines and grand gestures. As spring bloomed in New York City, the transformation that had begun in Katz's delicatessen was taking root in ways that even Arnold couldn't have anticipated when he first lowered his hood that winter morning. The story had caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who began quietly observing the daily life at the deli. What she captured wasn't just the obvious changes, James's growing confidence, the reformed Wall Street professionals' mentorship programs, or Arnold's surprise visits. Instead, she found herself documenting the subtle shifts in human interaction that occurred when people chose to truly see one another. One rainy Tuesday morning, a well-dressed woman entered the deli, her designer umbrella dripping onto the worn floor. 3 months ago, she might have kept her distance from the man in work boots who had just finished his shift at a nearby construction site. Instead, she found herself sharing a table with him, drawn into a conversation about their shared experiences of raising teenagers in the city. The filmmaker's camera captured the moment their laughter bridged what once seemed an unbridgeable social gap. James had become more than just an employee. He had evolved into what regular customers called the heart of Katz's, his station behind. The counter had become a sort of unofficial counseling booth, where people would share their struggles and triumphs while waiting for their orders. His own experience of falling from stability into homelessness and then finding his way back through an unexpected act of kindness gave him a unique perspective that resonated with everyone, from cab drivers to corporate executives. The young, finance professionals who had once mocked James had transformed their weekly lunch hour into what they called connection sessions. They would bring colleagues from different firms to the deli, not to discuss market trends or investment strategies, but to learn from James and others who had experienced life from perspectives they had never considered. The sessions became so popular that they had to start a waiting list. Arnold's influence continued to grow, though often in ways that never made headlines. He had quietly established a foundation that worked to identify skilled workers who had fallen into homelessness due to medical issues or other circumstances beyond their control. The foundation didn't just offer financial assistance, it provided a comprehensive support system that included medical care, job placement, and ongoing mentorship. One morning, a former software engineer who had lost everything to medical debt walked into Katz's. He ordered the cheapest item on the menu, counting out coins just as James once had. Before anyone else could react, James caught Arnold's eye across the deli. Without a word, the two men enacted what had become their unofficial protocol for such situations. While James engaged the man in conversation, Arnold made a few quiet phone calls. By the time the engineer finished his meal, He had an interview scheduled with a tech company and an appointment with a medical specialist. The Deli's transformation had begun to influence city policy in unexpected ways. Urban planners and social workers started studying what they called the Katz's effect, the phenomenon of how a single business could become a catalyst for community transformation. The city council was developing new initiatives based on the principles that had emerged organically at Katz's: dignity through opportunity, community through connection, and strength through support. The wall of opportunities behind the counter had evolved into a sophisticated network of support. Local businesses, inspired by the Deli's example, began actively seeking out employees who needed a second chance. The Finance Professionals Foundation had developed an algorithm to match job seekers with opportunities, taking into account not just their skills and experience, but also their personal circumstances and needs. James's arthritic hands had improved significantly under proper medical care, but more remarkable was his emotional transformation. The documentary filmmaker captured a powerful moment when he encountered one of his former construction colleagues who had fallen on hard times. Without hesitation, James shared his story, connected his friend with Arnold's foundation, and demonstrated how dignity could be maintained even in life's hardest moments. The Deli's famous photo wall had taken on new meaning. Alongside the celebrities and politicians, there now hung pictures of regular customers who had experienced their own transformations. Each photo told a story of connection and renewal, creating a visual testament to the power of community and second chances. Arnold had insisted that his own photo be placed not among the celebrities, but among these everyday heroes. The young professionals who had once represented the worst of Wall Street's callousness had become some of the most effective advocates for social change within the financial industry. They had developed a program that allowed companies to invest in social impact bonds, creating a sustainable model for funding initiatives like the one that had helped James. Their quarterly presentations at major banks always began with the story of that winter morning at Katz's, using their own transformation as a catalyst for institutional change. One particularly moving moment caught on camera was when a group of business school students visited the Deli for a case study on corporate social responsibility. Instead of finding a simple success story, they encountered a complex web of human connections that challenged their preconceptions about business, community, and success. James and the reformed finance professionals shared their perspectives, while Arnold unexpectedly joined the discussion, leading to a 3-hour conversation that changed the course of several young careers. The fitness sessions in the park had evolved into a comprehensive wellness program, with Arnold bringing in healthcare professionals, nutritionists, and mental health experts to provide holistic support to community members. The sight of Wall Street executives doing push-ups alongside day laborers and former homeless individuals had become a normal part of the neighborhood landscape. The documentary captured a powerful scene when a city official arrived to present James with a Civilian Service Award. Instead of accepting it himself, James asked that it be dedicated to the entire Katz's community. His speech, delivered with characteristic humility, emphasized how true change comes not from individual actions, but from a community's collective choice to see and support one another. The Deli's influence had begun to spread internationally. Delegations from cities around the world came to study how a simple delicatessen had become a model for social transformation. They found that the key wasn't in the programs or initiatives, but in the fundamental shift in how people chose to interact with one another. Arnold's regular visits continued, though he now often brought other influential figures with him, not for publicity, but to witness firsthand how genuine community transformation occurs. These visitors would find themselves serving behind the counter alongside James, learning that true leadership often begins with the simple act of seeing others as equals. The filmmaker's documentary captured countless small moments that illustrated the ongoing transformation. A CEO helping a homeless man craft a resume, a former addict celebrating 6 months of sobriety with the community that had supported her recovery, a group of teenagers choosing to spend their weekend helping elderly, customers carry their orders to nearby apartments. As spring turned to summer, the Deli's impact continued to grow in unexpected ways. Local schools had incorporated regular visits into their curriculum, teaching students about community, compassion, and the power of second chances through real-world examples. James, once invisible to society, had become a respected speaker. At these educational sessions, sharing his story with a new generation, the documentary's most powerful scenes weren't the big moments or grand gestures, but the quiet transformations that occurred daily. The way customers now naturally shared tables with strangers, the authentic conversations that bridged social divides, the spontaneous acts of kindness that had become routine rather than exceptional. Arnold's vision had expanded far beyond that initial intervention. He had created a model for sustainable community transformation that combined business success with social impact. The Deli's profits had actually increased as it became known, not just for its sandwiches, but for its role in demonstrating how commerce and compassion could coexist and reinforce each other. The story that had begun with a moment of conflict in a deli line had evolved into a movement that challenged fundamental assumptions about community, business, and human potential. It proved that sometimes the most powerful changes begin not with grand plans or massive resources, but with the simple choice to see the dignity in every person who walks through the door. As summer heat shimmered above New York's sidewalks, the transformation that had begun at Katz's Delicatessen was about to face its greatest test. The documentary about the Deli's transformation had been released, catching the attention of national media and bringing a new wave of visitors to the historic establishment. But this attention brought both opportunities and challenges that would test the authenticity of the movement. The first test came in the form of corporate interests. Major companies began sending representatives to study the Katz's model, hoping to replicate its success for their own public relations purposes. They arrived with polished presentations and promises of significant financial investments, but James and Arnold recognized the difference between genuine transformation and corporate performance. During one particularly memorable meeting, a CEO of a major fast food chain proposed turning the Katz's story into a national campaign. The executive spoke of franchising the concept, complete with standardized community engagement protocols and metrics for measuring social impact. The documentary crew captured the moment when James, now confident in his role as the Deli's heart, quietly but firmly declined. "What happens here can't be franchised," James explained, his weathered hands gesturing to the bustling deli floor. "It's not about protocols or metrics. It's about seeing each person who walks through that door as a human being with a story worth hearing." Arnold, standing nearby in his signature grey hoodie, nodded in approval. The reformed Wall Street professionals had also begun facing pushback from within their industry. Some colleagues accused them of going soft or losing focus on the bottom line. Their response was to organize a series of field trips to Katz's, bringing skeptical executives to witness firsthand how social impact and business success could coexist. One such visit led to an unexpected breakthrough. A hedge fund manager, known for his aggressive business tactics, found himself sharing a table with a former executive who had lost everything in the 2008 financial crisis. Their conversation, captured by the documentary crew, became a powerful testament to the way authentic human connection could bridge even the widest gaps. Arnold's continued involvement had evolved in surprising ways. Rather than simply making appearances or donations, he had become deeply involved in the daily life of the community. He started a mentorship program that paired successful professionals with individuals working to rebuild their lives. The program's first graduation ceremony was held at Katz's, with participants sharing their stories over the Deli's famous pastrami sandwiches. The Deli's physical space had begun to evolve as well. The community had raised funds to renovate the basement, transforming it into a multi-purpose space for job training, educational programs, and community meetings. The renovation maintained the Deli's historic character while creating a modern facility where people could work toward their goals. James's role had grown far beyond his original position. He had become a sought-after speaker at universities and business schools, sharing his perspective on authentic community transformation. Yet he never let this attention change his fundamental approach to his work at the Deli. He continued to serve customers with the same dignity and attention that had been shown to him that winter morning. The young professionals who had once mocked James had developed their foundation into a powerful force for change in the financial industry. They had created a certification program for community-conscious companies, with standards based on the principles they had learned at Katz's. The certification quickly became a sought-after designation in the business world. The documentary captured a particularly powerful moment when one of the original antagonists, now a leading advocate for corporate social responsibility, brought his teenage son to the Deli. He shared the story of his own transformation, not minimizing his past behavior, but using it as a lesson in the importance of seeing the humanity in every person. Arnold's fitness sessions in the park had evolved into a comprehensive wellness movement. Participants now included corporate executives, former homeless individuals, students, and retirees, all working together to improve not just their physical health, but their understanding of one another. The sessions often ended with shared meals at Katz's, where conversations continued and relationships deepened. The Deli's influence on city policy continued to grow. Urban planners from around the world studied how a single business could become a catalyst for community transformation. The Katz's effect had become a case study in how authentic community engagement could revitalize neighborhoods without leading to displacement or gentrification. One morning, a group of business owners from Detroit arrived to learn about the Katz's model. They found themselves working alongside James and other staff members, experiencing firsthand how small interactions could build meaningful connections. By day's end, they had begun developing plans to implement similar approaches in their own communities. The documentary team captured the moment when a regular customer, a teacher from a nearby school, shared how the Deli's transformation had influenced her classroom. She had created a program called Everyone Has a Story, teaching her students to look beyond surface appearances and practice genuine empathy. James's health continued to improve under the care arranged by Arnold's foundation. His arthritic hands, while not fully healed, had regained enough strength for him to pursue his old passion for woodworking. He began teaching basic carpentry skills to others in the community center basement, sharing not just practical knowledge, but lessons in persistence and dignity. The wall of opportunities behind the counter had become so successful that a tech-savvy, regular customer developed an app to help manage the growing network of job listings, housing opportunities, and support services. The app, named Second Chance, maintained the personal touch that made the original wall special while expanding its reach throughout the city. Arnold's foundation had begun working with other businesses to replicate elements of the Katz's model. Rather than imposing a standardized approach, they helped each establishment find authentic ways to engage with their communities. The key, as James often explained, was creating spaces where genuine human connection could flourish. The documentary highlighted how the movement had begun influencing unexpected areas of society. Law firms started providing pro bono services to community members. Medical professionals offered free clinics in the Deli's basement, and artists worked with local youth to create murals celebrating the neighborhood's diversity and resilience. One of the most powerful sequences in the documentary showed a series of before and after moments. The suit-wearing antagonist transformed into a mentor. James evolved from a struggling customer to a community leader, and Arnold's simple act of kindness expanded into a sustainable movement for social change. The filmmaker captured countless small moments that illustrated the ongoing impact. A former CEO volunteering at the counter, a group of teenagers helping elderly customers with their groceries, a successful entrepreneur sharing her story of homelessness and recovery with business school students. As summer progressed, the Deli became a hub for what locals called connection tourism. People came not just for the famous sandwiches, but to witness and learn from the authentic community transformation taking place. Unlike typical tourist attractions, visitors found themselves becoming part of the ongoing story. The Young Professionals Foundation had begun working with universities to develop curricula based on the principles of community-conscious business. Their quarterly presentations now included case studies from businesses around the country that had successfully implemented elements of the Katz's model. James's birthday, which had sparked the original transformation, was now celebrated as Community Day at the Deli. The event brought together people from all walks of life to share stories, break bread, and strengthen the bonds that had grown throughout the year. The documentary's final scenes showed how the movement had begun to influence global conversations about community development and social change. Delegates from international organizations visited regularly, learning how authentic human connection could drive sustainable transformation. What had started as a moment of conflict in a deli line had evolved into a model for how businesses could serve as catalysts for positive social change. The key, as both James and Arnold often emphasized, was maintaining authenticity while scaling impact. The transformation proved that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simple choice to see and acknowledge the dignity in every human being. As autumn painted New York streets with golden light, the movement that had started at Katz's Delicatessen faced a pivotal moment. The documentary about the Deli's transformation had won several prestigious awards, bringing international attention to the quiet revolution taking place on the Lower East Side. But with this recognition came an unexpected challenge: how to preserve the authenticity of a grassroots movement in the face of global acclaim. The documentary's success had made James an unlikely celebrity, though he carried this new status with the same quiet dignity that had defined his journey. Television producers approached him with offers for reality shows and book deals, but he remained focused on what he considered his real work: the daily interactions at the Deli that continued to change lives one conversation at a time. One crisp morning, a group of international journalists gathered at Katz's to interview James about the movement's success. Instead of giving a formal interview, he invited them to work alongside him behind the counter. As they served customers and witnessed the natural flow of human connection, their story changed from one of viral sensation to something more profound, a lesson in the power of authentic human dignity. Arnold's involvement had deepened in unexpected ways. Rather than leveraging the movement's success for publicity, he focused on creating sustainable systems for long-term change. His foundation had developed what he called the dignity-first approach, which emphasized authentic human connection over metrics and measurements. When corporate consultants suggested streamlining the process, Arnold would simply smile and say, "You can't streamline humanity." The reformed Wall Street professionals had faced their own challenges. As their foundation's influence grew, they encountered pressure to prioritize quantifiable results over human impact. Their response was to create what they called connection metrics, a new way of measuring success that valued authentic relationships and personal transformation alongside traditional business outcomes. The documentary team returned to capture the movement's evolution, finding that the most powerful changes were often the quietest. They filmed a morning meeting where James and his team discussed how to maintain the Deli's intimate atmosphere despite serving hundreds more customers each day. The solution wasn't about efficiency or systems, but about ensuring every person who walked through the door felt truly seen. The Deli's basement community center had become a model for social innovation. Other businesses began converting their unused spaces into similar centers, creating a network of community hubs across the city. Each space maintained its unique character while sharing the core principle that had made Katz's successful: the recognition of human dignity in every interaction. James's arthritis had improved enough for him to expand his woodworking classes in the basement. Working with reclaimed wood from old buildings in the neighborhood, he taught participants more than just craftsmanship. Each piece they created carried a story of transformation, much like the makers themselves. The wooden tables they crafted now filled the deli, each one signed by its creator. The young professionals who had once mocked James had transformed their weekly connection sessions into a comprehensive business education program. CEOs and entry-level workers sat side by side, learning not just about financial success, but about the human foundations of sustainable business. The program had a waiting list months long, with participants flying in from around the world. Arnold's fitness sessions in the park had evolved into a movement of their own. What started as simple workout groups had become forums for breaking down social barriers through shared experience. The documentary captured powerful moments of connection: a homeless veteran spotting a corporate executive during bench presses, a former addict sharing life advice with a struggling teenager during cool-down stretches. The Deli's influence on urban policy had grown more profound. City planners now talked about the Katz's principle, the idea that successful community development required spaces where authentic human connection could flourish. Other cities began incorporating these principles into their development plans, creating what they called dignity zones, where human connection took precedence over commercial efficiency. One particularly moving scene showed a group of international business students working alongside James during the lunch rush. As they served customers and witnessed the natural flow of human interaction, their understanding of success began to shift. One student, the daughter of a major CEO, later wrote that her day at Katz's had completely changed her career plans. The wall of opportunities behind the counter had inspired a national movement. Other businesses began creating similar spaces, and a network of support emerged that transcended traditional social services. The Second Chance app had expanded to include mentorship matching, skill sharing, and community event planning, all built around the principle of human dignity. James's birthday celebration had become an annual festival of transformation. People from around the world gathered at Katz's to share stories of how the movement had influenced their communities. The documentary crew captured emotional reunions between people who had helped each other through difficult times, celebrating not just personal success, but the power of human connection. Arnold's foundation had begun working with universities to develop new curricula based on the principles of dignity-centered business. The courses combined practical business skills with lessons in human connection, using real examples from the Katz's movement to illustrate how commercial success and social impact could reinforce each other. The Young Professionals Certification program for community-conscious companies had gained international recognition. Rather than focusing on traditional corporate social responsibility metrics, the certification process emphasized authentic human connection and genuine community engagement. Companies found that pursuing the certification led to improved employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. The documentary captured a powerful moment when a group of business leaders from Silicon Valley visited the Deli. They arrived with plans to disrupt the social services sector through technology, but left with a deeper understanding of the irreplaceable value of human connection. One CEO later commented that an hour of serving sandwiches alongside James had taught him more about innovation than a decade in tech. James's influence had spread far beyond the Deli's walls. He had become a sought-after speaker at international conferences, not for his celebrity, but for his authentic wisdom about human dignity and connection. He always insisted on keeping his presentations conversational, often serving food to attendees. While sharing his insights, the movement's impact on education had deepened. Schools around the world began incorporating dignity education into their curricula, teaching students the principles of human connection and community building that had emerged from Katz's. The documentary showed children from different backgrounds working together on projects inspired by the Deli's transformation. Arnold's continued involvement remained focused on sustainability rather than publicity. He worked to ensure that the movement's principles could be adapted to different cultures and contexts without losing their essential humanity. When asked about the secret to the movement's success, he would often point to James and say, "It's not about systems or strategies, it's about seeing the dignity in every person." As autumn deepened, the documentary captured the movement's influence on unexpected areas of society. Healthcare providers began incorporating principles of dignity-centered care, legal firms developed new approaches to community justice, and urban planners designed spaces that encouraged authentic human connection. The Deli itself remained the heart of the movement, a living laboratory of human transformation. Each day brought new stories of connection and change, proving that the simplest interactions could have the most profound impact. The documentary's final scenes showed James closing up the Deli one evening, taking time to chat with each remaining customer, embodying the principle that had started it all, that every person deserves to be seen and heard. What had begun as a moment of conflict in a Deli line had evolved into a global movement for human dignity and connection. Yet its power remained in the small daily interactions that transformed lives one conversation at a time. The movement proved that in a world increasingly driven by technology and efficiency, the most innovative solution might be the simplest, treating each person we meet with genuine dignity and respect. As winter returned to New York City, bringing with it memories of that transformative morning a year ago, Katz's Delicatessen prepared to mark the anniversary of the moment that had changed countless lives. The documentary crew had returned for one final week of filming, capturing how a single act of kindness had grown into a movement that was reshaping society's understanding of human dignity and connection. The morning began like any other, with James arriving early to prep for the day. His hands, though still bearing the marks of years of hardship, moved with renewed strength as he tied on his apron. The simple routine carried deeper meaning now, each gesture a reminder of how far he had come and how many lives had been touched along the way. Arnold arrived unannounced, as was his custom, wearing the same grey hoodie that had become a symbol of the movement's authenticity. He joined James behind the counter, and together they served the first customers of the day. The documentary captured their easy companionship, a friendship forged through shared purpose rather than shared status. The young professionals who had once mocked James now arrived for their regular morning meeting, but today was different. They had gathered to launch a new initiative, a nationwide network of dignity-centered business incubators. Each location would combine elements that had made Katz's successful: communal dining spaces, job training centers, and opportunities for authentic human connection. The Deli's transformation had sparked what academics were calling the dignity economy, a new approach to business that prioritized human connection alongside profit. Major corporations had begun sending their executives to work shifts at Katz's, not as publicity stunts, but as genuine attempts to understand how authentic human interaction could transform their organizations. One particularly moving scene showed a CEO working alongside James during the lunch rush. The executive had arrived wearing an expensive suit, but quickly donned an apron and rolled up his sleeves. By day's end, he had learned more about leadership from serving sandwiches and listening to customers' stories than from years of management seminars. The basement community center had evolved into what locals called the Dignity Hub. Programs ranging from job training to mental health support operated with a common philosophy: every person who walked through the door deserved to be seen, heard, and treated with respect. The success rates of these programs had caught the attention of social scientists worldwide. James's woodworking classes had produced more than just beautiful furniture. Each piece told a story of transformation, and the documentary captured the moment when a former Wall Street executive presented James with a handcrafted chair, saying, "You taught me that true craftsmanship isn't just about working with wood. It's about reshaping lives." Arnold's foundation had developed what they called the dignity metric, a new way of measuring business success that valued human connection as much as financial performance. Companies that adopted these principles found themselves not just improving their social impact, but also their bottom lines, proving that dignity and prosperity could grow together. The weekly fitness sessions in the park had become a model for breaking down social barriers. The documentary showed people from all walks of life exercising together, their shared effort creating bonds that transcended traditional social divisions. Arnold's presence was no longer the main attraction. The real draw was the community itself. The wall of opportunities behind the counter had inspired similar initiatives around the world. The Second Chance app had evolved into a global platform for connecting people with resources and support, but it maintained its local focus. Each community added its own character to the basic framework, creating a network of authentic human connection. 1 year after that transformative winter morning, the Deli hosted a special celebration. But unlike typical corporate anniversaries, this event focused on the countless small transformations that had occurred over the year. The documentary captured people sharing stories of how their lives had changed, not through grand gestures, but through moments of genuine human connection. The reformed Wall Street professionals had created a new kind of business school curriculum, teaching future leaders that success comes not from dominating others, but from uplifting them. Their quarterly presentations now included case studies from around the world, showing how the principles of dignity-centered business could work in any context. James's influence had grown in unexpected ways. Rather than becoming a motivational speaker or writing self-help books, he had chosen to remain at the Deli, believing that the most powerful teaching happened through daily interaction. The documentary showed him training new employees, emphasizing that their real job wasn't just serving food, it was serving humanity. Arnold's ongoing involvement remained focused on sustainability rather than publicity. He worked to ensure that the movement's principles could be adapted to different cultures and contexts without losing their essential humanity. When asked about the secret to the movement's success, he would often point to James and say, "It's not about systems or strategies. It's about seeing the dignity in every person." The documentary captured a powerful moment when a group of international business leaders visited the Deli. They arrived expecting to learn about scalable systems and replicable processes. Instead, they found themselves working alongside James and his team, experiencing firsthand how authentic human connection could transform both individuals and organizations. The young professionals who had once represented the worst of Wall Street's arrogance had become leaders in what they called dignity-centered innovation. Their foundation now worked with companies worldwide, helping them understand that true innovation wasn't just about technology or efficiency. It was about creating spaces where human dignity could flourish. As winter deepened, the documentary showed how the movement had influenced unexpected areas of society. Healthcare providers began incorporating principles of dignity-centered care, legal firms developed new approaches to community justice, and urban planners designed spaces that encouraged authentic human connection. The Deli itself remained the heart of the movement, a living laboratory of human transformation. Each day brought new stories of connection and change, proving that the simplest interactions could have the most profound impact. The documentary's final scenes showed James closing up the Deli one evening, taking time to chat with each remaining customer, embodying the principle that had started it all, that every person deserves to be seen and heard. A year after Arnold had lowered his hood and stood up for a stranger's dignity, the movement he helped spark had grown beyond anyone's expectations. But its power remained in the small, daily interactions that transformed lives, one conversation at a time. The movement proved that in a world increasingly driven by technology and efficiency, the most innovative solution might be the simplest, treating each person we meet with genuine dignity and respect. The documentary's final sequence showed a typical morning at Katz's. James stood behind the counter, his hands steady and strong, serving customers with the same dignity that had been shown to him a year ago. Arnold worked alongside him, the grey hoodie now a symbol of authentic leadership. The young professionals who had once mocked James now sat with new employees, sharing stories of transformation over steaming plates of pastrami. As the camera panned across the bustling Deli, it captured countless small moments of human connection. A CEO sharing a table with a construction worker, a former homeless person mentoring a struggling teenager, a Wall Street executive learning woodworking from James in the basement workshop. Each interaction represented a thread in the larger tapestry of community transformation. The movement that had begun with a moment of conflict in a deli line had evolved into something profound, yet simple, a reminder that every person carries within them the potential for transformation, and that true strength lies not in status or wealth, but in the ability to see and honor the dignity in every human being. The final shot showed James and Arnold standing in front of Katz's as the sun set on another day of serving not just sandwiches, but hope, dignity, and the possibility of transformation. The movement they had sparked would continue to grow, not through corporate expansion or branded programs, but through the quiet power of authentic human connection, one conversation at a time.